Hey everyone, I'm Noctis Corvus, but you can call me Noctis. This week is about the middle of June, which is a rather fitting time that I feel that I share something related to Pride. For those who are maybe unaware, June is actually Pride Month for the LGBTQ community, where there is a main focus on history and spreading awareness about various identities. Usually, for me, I will acknowledge this with some series of works, and I have done it in the past where I've done a single work. But take last year, for example, where I did a series of turning pride flags themselves into various drawings and images. This year, I want to do something a little bit different, since I have also been a little busier this year than I often find myself. So, given my current schedule and factors mainly behind the scenes, I decided that this year I would use this as an excuse to draw two characters rather relevant to me in this instance, and kind of discuss it all via this lens. I mean, I could have done a set and looked at the flags and such and kind of rush it all, but I also kind of just wanted to talk about my personal experiences of it all for this year. In the future, I am a lot more likely to look back at the wider idea of pride in general and looking at more identities. But today will be my exploration and experiences of it, and kind of how it has been influenced by my hobbies, writing, and so on and so forth. The later part of the video will be looking more at the drawing itself, so I'm probably just going to talk. But that all leads us then to the first question of the day. How could these two characters actually relate to my exploration of identity? I mean, to most people, they are just characters in a story, and little more beyond that, as I just enjoy writing. Yes, they may be some of my older ones, but they can't be that much different to the newer characters I make. Can they? However, it was through writing that I did kind of start to explore a lot of various ideas that I otherwise didn't know how to approach. Before this story kind of came to be there were plenty of shorter stories or single scenes that I kind of often hoped would lead to a more significant project. Yet this was the one and the first one to kind of take off. And as you can probably tell, it was by no means the last. But for a little bit of context here, the story itself focuses on the brown-haired girl here, her name being North. And she is someone that I have drawn before here on the channel during the past few videos. Well, a past few videos, maybe. If I am bored, I commonly find myself coming back to her and her character in a way, whether it be to draw her in some kind of situation, or to actually work on the backstory and kind of develop the plot further for the main dialogue and plot and everything. The blonde-haired girl with shorter hair, her name being Evelyn, is then a secondary character to the story, but still one of a lot more relevance, definitely considering the plot, other characters, and the order of events. Their backstory now is then pretty decided. The two of them are childhood friends who are extremely close, and they kind of know each other as well as they know themselves. As the story progresses, they get closer, and the relationship would then develop to a point of them being together romantically. I did debate whether they would stay simply as close friends for a while, yet I then ended up liking this route a bit more with the romance, definitely considering how the later plot kind of unfolds. It is sort of implied though in the plot that certain events make them realise their attraction, and kind of almost encourages them to take that step and the risk it involves considering their friendship. That, however, isn't how it always would have gone though. I added the romantic element of their dynamic later, as I have said, and they'd otherwise been established as just close friends for the plot. It was really only in a later draft that I decided that I wanted to try and explore romance with the story as well, even as a subplot to the main story. Well, especially as a subplot to the main story. I never wanted it to be the main focus or to take away from the events that were actually happening, as it never sat right with me when it did become the main focus. This was all kind of brought on by another book that I was reading at the time, where I kind of noticed that the main plot started to take a bit of a backseat to the romantic aspect, which eventually did lead to me putting the book down. I wasn't convinced by the development of the relationship with the two main characters, and I didn't see how the main guy and girl getting together was more important than the main plot. This was also considering that I started reading it for the plot, and the main plot was like a large-scale threat to a kingdom. So I kind of didn't really see how the romance was more important. And I also want to note here that it wasn't even marketed as a romance, which often struck me as a bit strange, considering that back then I didn't really read romance. I still don't, to be honest, it isn't just a genre I like. But that book was what spurred me to explore why I didn't like how it progressed. It wasn't just because it was a romance, so I wanted to explore it in a way that I knew best. And that was with writing. That then kind of led me to the next draft of the story, where it kind of saw me add a new side character into the mix. The whole gist was that it was a male friend of North and Ev, who they met at some point somewhere in their school life, and the group was a trio instead of a duo. And the intent was that this guy would be of some sort of interest to North. As you can probably tell how I'm talking, I actually found that version the other day, and it reads so much more like a comedy than anything. It's so obvious reading it that they would not be interested in each other in real life, and the male character was so two-dimensional compared to anybody else in that draft that it was very clear that he was just sort of plonked into the world. He didn't really have a place or a purpose, but he was just there. Like, speaking honestly for a moment, it was so stiff and awkward, and I never actually got that far into that version, since writing those two interacting just felt so forced and uncomfortable. Ev also took a backseat in that version, and became practically written out in the later stages as I tried so hard to make this guy work. He was ending up basically just a male version of her. And I tried. I find it so funny because I did try. At that point in my life, I'd only really ever been exposed to the idea of straight couples. I hadn't really heard the term of gay or lesbian, and I didn't know that it was even an option or what it actually entailed. So I tried so hard to make the relationship work by making Ev into a guy, and that was then the next draft without any of the problems fixed. I'm sure I'm not the only one to say it, but gender swapping a character without thinking much more beyond that is commonly one way to lead to a host of other issues, where things just don't really fit quite right. Things about the personality are off, events don't quite line up right, and even terms of the dialogue may not fit anymore. It actually led to me removing Ev entirely from the next version out of what I can only call frustration. These were all within the same year and a couple of months apart, and I was really trying to ignore the issues completely with it. I started to feel that it was something that I just wasn't meant to understand, and that maybe I was the one overthinking it all, and the other books were just how it went. I think then it was a few months later, a few months down the line of me trying to work all this out, and having these frustrations, that was the first time that I was online a bit more, and I first came across the term LGBTQ. And that was then my first introduction to what people around me didn't speak about. Because it wasn't spoken about with the people I knew, and I otherwise wouldn't have been exposed to it. A little bit after that, one of my peers in high school began to socially transition, and that again exposed me to a lot more ideas and thoughts that I otherwise wouldn't have really known about. Don't get me wrong, I kind of knew that there would have been other things beyond what people spoke about or mentioned, but I didn't know what they were or what they entailed. I didn't really know why people didn't speak about it, or kind of why there were certain things assumed. But when I was kind of exposed to it for the first time there, I looked into it, I researched it, as I was curious. And that's when things started to sort of click and fall into place. Now, I didn't tell anybody. I explored it via writing like I did for most things. I went back to the idea of North and Ev, as I commonly did, and I explored the more common ideas of a romantic dynamic with the two, and found that it flowed a lot better. By building on that foundation of friendship built and maintained over years and the dynamic I already had for them, things fell a lot more into place, and the largest hurdle for the draft and the outlines had really just been working out what would push them to take that next step, and to risk this deep of a friendship by committing to a relationship that they aren't sure would work or not. I then found that this as well wasn't such a drastic shift. They could still have platonic moments mixed in with those more seen typically as romantic, and it fixed that entire branch of the story, since I also wasn't then going out of my way to focus on a developing subplot. The characters made more sense, and ultimately, it helped me make sense of that little bit of myself along the way. Now, again, how, you may be asking, since it is very possible for people to write based on research, or things that they may not be entirely related to. Write what you know only really tells you to do in-depth research on something if you aren't writing from your own experience. So it is very possible for me to just think that that was their dynamic and that was what worked for the stories, but not really apply to myself. And it didn't for a while. I still didn't really know much about myself from that angle, but I was happy with how these two worked. What it sort of did do, though, was make it that bit more approachable with myself, for lacking better terms. It made it more of an option in my mind that made sense, and something that seemed more obvious than anything, even if the adults, teachers, and all of that never really acknowledged it around me. And I do kind of need to stress that too. Before I heard about it in high school, I hadn't even heard the terms before, so it simply didn't seem like a choice or anything until I heard and learnt more about it. It is kind of why exploration and knowledge and simple visibility is important to me. It makes it more available to the people who need it, and it is just putting the information out there so it doesn't seem so closed off as it might have originally with me. It was then actually a few years later that I did realise it applied to myself. I won't go into too much detail about it all, but I realised that the common explanation of attraction and how others accounted for it made much more sense to me when paired more with girls that I knew compared to guys. I wouldn't say I ever had much of an interest in people until maybe later college, but I found that I could better understand what made the girls attractive compared to the guys, which is kind of why I felt comfortable with the term lesbian. And that comfort was always knowing that it might change, but also knowing that it made me comfortable for the time being, and if it changed later, it changed later. And that is why that is the label I still stick with, even though now it does fit a lot better and I am more comfortable with that fitting a lot better. It was almost funny for a while. Someone I knew kept calling me a romantic, which I thought made sense since emotions have often been hard for me to understand. Even understanding the normal array has kind of proven a challenge, which I do kind of link back to other stuff going on with me as well now that I know about all of that. Yet, even then, I still felt that the term aromantic didn't quite fit me right. I mean, I haven't touched on it in this one, but the term asexual made complete and total sense. I never really had to explore or doubt that, as it fit straight away. And it was something that I never really questioned. I heard about the term, looked into it, and it clicked. Which is also, in a way, why I kind of haven't mentioned it here. With aromantic, I would try and feel like it did because that was what people recommended I look at. That's what it looked like from outside. But even saying it didn't quite feel right. It didn't fit. Now, thanks to these two characters and exploring and all of that, I very early on accepted that lesbian fit better. And again, it was with the knowledge that it may change and shift, and that was all right. But I guess the reason that I'm kind of going on about all of this is because what it looks like from outside isn't always what fits. And again, I realised that by exploring with these two and kind of exploring it via writing, because that was the outlet that I had at the time. And really, all of this does link back to these explorations and these two characters. Since, yes, I was developing a story around them and developing a world and a narrative, but I was still kind of taking from parts of myself and questions that I had and understanding about different things and putting that into the story. To this day, this section of the story has been one of the more important ones personally for coming to understand myself. But that is all that I really have to say for that, and I hope you don't mind that I got a little bit personal there. Working out other parts of myself kind of clicked when I heard the term, or they were explored a little bit later with other stories. And this isn't to say that it's all incredibly relevant and present in the story. In fact, it isn't overly explored or touched on often. But I kind of preferred all the outcomes better when it isn't under the microscope, and it's more just a simply accepted part of the characters. Nobody really questions it or draws attention to it, and there isn't really a spotlight placed on it. North's hair is brown, she likes purple, and she identifies in these manners. Evelyn, again, has blonde hair, blue eyes, and identifies as a lesbian. It's simply part of the characters and part of the story. And I did find that exploring these in this more casual manner definitely helped come to different conclusions and understandings with myself. Now, I also personally identify as non-binary, but that is likely a conversation I will save for another day, as it didn't actually tie into these two characters here. These two had nothing to do with that development, and I actually just want to take the rest of this video to turn attention towards the drawing and choices I made there, as that is also quite relevant to today. I think I've had enough of being very personal and in-depth for now. The first thing that I actually want to address art-wise is the asexual flag for the pin on North's bag. You see, the flag itself represents the community, and the typical ace flag has been a 4-stripe flag that is black, grey, white and dark purple. However, recently I was being aware that people have suggested a new flag for the community that I personally prefer and wanted to use for this case. Now, from what I know and have looked into, the new flag was introduced online by a creator as Shabi, who goes by Acing Grace over on Instagram, which is where she introduced the flag from. From what I have seen, a while back saw them starting the discussion around the ace flag and the meaning held by each and every stripe. Through feedback, surveys and further discussions, she came to a new flag design that some could say fits the community better, and kind of is like an updated version of the previous. Now, the main change that kind of sparked all this discussion was the white stripe. In the original flag, it meant to represent allies and partners, which personally often sat a little bit strange, as the flag is meant to represent the asexual community, yet one of the 4 stripes was for people outside who support. And don't get me wrong, I can see the importance of that and those groups, but I also couldn't see why the stripe couldn't have been for something else within the community, as there is a lot of layers, nuance and diversity within it. In the new 2026 design, the white stripe now represents the spectrum of intimacy and how it is experienced. It is meant to show all the ways that it may appear and all the ways people may feel it, and I kind of personally prefer this. They have, however, also added new stripes to the flag to represent and include more of the variety in the community. The yellow stripe stands for intersectionality and multiculturalism, especially within the ace community, to highlight how it can overlap with other things and the joy that it brings people. It's meant to highlight how all of these things can come together and coexist within the community, and bring people together to celebrate it about themselves. The pink is then the other new stripe. That one is meant to represent all forms of love in the community. That includes platonic for people who are on the aromantic spectrum, but also other forms of love for people who are only asexual. Now, I am also aware that there has been quite a bit of debate around the new flag and the need for it. I myself was introduced to it by someone addressing these controversies and the discussions about it, but I personally like the new flag and the meanings to it. I still do like the old one, and I will likely still use it in tandem as the old one for now is more recognisable. But the new one also makes a bit more sense, and I also like how it looks. I like what it represents, even though there are people who are saying that it wasn't needed. And that is a debate that I'm not going to go too far into here. I'm not really wanting to get into the finer points or address every issue that I've seen people mention about it, as there's a lot of talking points and a lot of back and forth about it. At the end of the day, though, people will use whatever flag they tend to like better. And in this case, I wanted to use the newer one for North, since I prefer it for this use. I also did, though, just want to mention it here briefly, just to explain what the flag is, since I can understand that a lot of people wouldn't have seen it yet. It would have been easier to use the old flag, as a lot of people would have caught onto it much sooner, and maybe recognised what it was. But that's why I explain it. I wanted to use it, and I did. For the rest of the drawing, though, I then wanted to keep the scene quite calm and bright. It is meant to look like these two are just enjoying their time together and relaxing between events of their plot, without much need to worry about anything else. It might be a date, but beyond that, it is just them two spending time together in a manner that they choose. And I do think that I got this across quite well. Mainly in the fact that they're lying down, relaxing, smiling, and the palette isn't too dark. I could have made them running and up and active, but then that would have risked adding some sense of urgency, especially given the environment that I know they exist within. So I wanted to keep it very calm. Anyway though, I think I have waffled on for as long as I can here today. I will say again that I hope people don't mind me for not doing more for Pride. I mean, I absolutely could have tried to rush to do more for more representations and drawings like last year. But I ultimately felt more comfortable doing this as the solution for the time being, as it didn't feel right to rush as much as I would have needed to do everything for anything else. Any other set would have been poor quality, because they were rushed, and it wouldn't be right to do that to any group of people. But with all of that being said in the circles that I've spoken, thank you so much for watching. I hope you like the outcome, and I hope you've enjoyed this week, and the drawing. I hope you don't mind my tangents and the waffle to explain it, or that it maybe got a little bit personal at the beginning. But I do hope you have a wonderful week, and to see you next time. If it helps anybody understand themselves better, then I'm glad for it. But for now, goodbye.